Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to the ROKER RAPPORT podcast in association with the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. As we look ahead to Sunderland's first away game back in the Championship, which comes at Bristol City on Saturday. Of course, this comes off the back of our promising opening draw at the Stadium of Light against Coventry last weekend, which we may get some neutral thoughts on in today's pod. So for a slightly different neutral look at this weekend's fixture and hopefully a bit of much needed background on the Championship in general, we're very pleased to welcome Ryan Dilks from the Second Tier podcast. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, mate. I'm delighted to be here. I mean, when it comes to club podcasts, you guys are the crème de la crème of club podcasts. So as soon as I saw Sunderland promoted, I thought, right, follow ROKER RAPPORT on Twitter. And now we've got a partnership which I hope is only going to blossom as the season goes on.
Well, with that sort of first response, you can come on every week if you like. We'll just review every single opposition as we're going along. But brilliant to have you on the ROKER RAPPORT podcast. I mean, how are you keeping? Have you had a good summer? Or have you enjoyed the Lionesses this summer?
The Lionesses were great. I really enjoyed watching that, and then it culminated in the final at the weekend. As opposed to the summer, we've continued with the podcasts despite no football being on, so it became a bit of a stretch at times actually having anything to talk about, but we got there in the end, and I'm just glad now that we've got football back, because even though the summer is nice to have a little break, after a while I get a bit tetchy and I just want to talk about football again and have some football to talk about. So it was kind of it was a nice relief to have last weekend back in our lives.
Yeah. It was good to have. Very nerve wracking again. You felt the nerves again, but yeah, it was good to have it back in that sense. But like I said, it's nice just to be speaking to a second tier podcast as Sunderland fans and be part of it at the same time, rather than have our faces up, pressed against the window, just wanting to be part of it. And like I said, I imagine you're kind of fully back in the swing of things in terms of your coverage of the season. But I mean, tell us a bit about the background of how the Second Tier podcast started up and kind of your story so far.
Well, this is our fourth season doing the podcast now, so we haven't actually been going too long, I suppose, compared to some podcasts, but we've grown much bigger than we ever expected in that time. We're now the number one Championship podcast. I mean, there aren't that many around anyway, but we've got this wonderful audience now who listen to us week in, week out, and we're glad that we've got Sunderland now to join us. We were kind of fingers crossed that Sunderland would come back because having lost Forest, Fulham, not as much Bournemouth, but big clubs, Forest in particular, a big club. We were looking for another big fan base to come up. So no disrespect to him, but when it's between Wycombe and Sunderland in the playoff final, we're a bit like, please, Sunderland, please. So that was always nice, as well as just having a big club like Sunderland back playing in a level where they should be, because they should be in the Premier League, really, but they shouldn't be in League One, should they?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I'll probably get pelters off neutrals if it comes from me, saying that about something. But you said it's just you and Justin who do the podcast, or have you got other people?
It's me and Justin, but every Sunday we like to get a couple of guests on from other podcasts. So we've got a kind of contributor from every club who we have two guests on, and then we'll have also another one phoning in to give us a quick run through of how their game went. So not only do you get the neutral perspective, you also hear the thoughts of fans who will obviously have actually been to the games, so you can see from a first-hand perspective how things went, their thoughts, who stood out, that kind of thing.
I mean, as I said, right up the top, it's nice to get some neutral views on fixtures, and you talked about how big our club is. It's always nice to hear that from not just us saying it, because we're always going to think that. But what teams do you and Justin follow? Who are your teams in the Championship?
Well, Justin's a big Derby fan, so we were in the Championship, but that's all gone very south very quickly. And I've kind of come out the closet now and revealed that I'm also a Derby fan. Because initially we didn't want us to both be known as Derby fans, because otherwise we were worried about it being two Derby fans slagging off the rest of the league. But I think the cat's kind of out the bag now with that one. So that was the main reason why we started doing the Championship podcast, because Derby had been in the Championship since 2008. So it was 14 years on the trot where we were in the Championship week in, week out. So we were kind of used to it by that point, and ironically, 3 seasons into us actually doing the podcast, we get relegated. So that was the main reason why we started the podcast in the first place. But we've come akin to the Championship now, and I just love it as a league because it's unpredictable and you never know where each team's going to finish, unlike the Premier League, for example, where you have a good idea of where each team is going to finish. It's just the unpredictability and the roller coaster ride and the craziness that you get week in, week out with the second tier.
So was there any, you're talking about Derby County, was there any conversation where it was like, did we make this into a league second and third tier podcast?
A third tier podcast? No, it's always been the Championship because we know the Championship like the back of our hands now. When we first started the pod, we were like, okay, we're big Championship fans because we've been around so long. Why not start having a chat about it? And because we watch a hell of a lot more Championship football now than we used to, because we try to watch as many of each game as possible, it's got to the point now where we are full-blown Championship nerds, and transitioning to the third tier would be too weird, really. But hopefully we'll see Derby back in the Championship in the near future. I mean, we've started well, only 1 week in, but we've started well, we've signed really well. So, yeah, hopefully it won't be long before Derby are back where they belong.
I can see Derby as that, like we were every summer, where people would go,
yeah,
they have to go up, it has to be this time,
Yeah, well, you go one of two ways, don't you? When you're a big club like your Ipswiches, your Sunderlands, your Portsmouth, for example, you're either lingering around there for ages, or you do like a Southampton or Norwich, for example, where you go down and go straight back up. So it's either one or the other, really. And so you don't really see many teams, big clubs, going down and then getting promoted second time of asking. It's always first time of asking, or you're lingering there for an age.
Yeah, no, I know we're getting you on to obviously speak about the Championship, and we're going to go through all of that. But one of my big fears of staying in League One for another year was, I mean, as you've rattled a few off there, League One's full of huge clubs now.
Yeah,
who were battling to get back up, and it's such a bizarre league. I was really worried if we stayed down another year, that was going to take us another 3-4 years to get out because of just the size of some of the other clubs in there.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? If Sunderland hadn't have got promoted, then you could make a fair argument that there were bigger clubs in League One than there were in the Championship, or it wouldn't be too far off, would it, in terms of, the stature of some clubs and the general attendances. I mean, the two biggest attendances in the whole of the Football League in the weekend just gone were Sunderland and Derby. They were the only ones to get over 30,000, and I think that just goes to show, these are big clubs. And really, I mean, people will disagree with me, but I think Derby are a Premier League club. Sunderland are without a doubt a Premier League club. So it's always a bit... I always like to see these clubs playing at the highest level possible, as opposed to... I'm a bit of a traditionalist in that sense, like seeing a Bournemouth in the Premier League, for example. I mean, they've got every right to be there, but, just in terms of the club size, it just feels a bit wrong in a strange way that you've got these big clubs outside who are looking up at Bournemouth, for example. I keep picking on them. Well, that's just going to infuriate fans, isn't it?
Well, I was just going to give you a get out there because I'm old enough to think of almost Oldham Athletic as a top top flight club. Yeah. But yeah, what's happened to them? But I mean, going back to your podcast, I mean, you said you're kind of fully underway now for the season. I mean, but just for people who are kind of wanting to listen in, I mean, what's your kind of weekly schedule for releases? I mean, how do you do things?
We do 2 episodes a week, one every Sunday, and then we'll do one every Thursday. If there's midweek games, we'll obviously talk about the games that have happened. If there hasn't, we'll look ahead to the games that are coming up. So you've got plenty of content from us. And as I say, during the past summer, we were doing episodes every week, twice a week anyway. So yeah, you get plenty of a bang for your buck with us. And we like to give as much content to listeners as possible, even when the calendar is a bit lighter when it comes to football. There you go.
So anyone who wants to hear more about, who we're playing and what's going on in the Championship, get on to the second tier podcast. But yeah, let's go into the Championship a bit, because it's a bit strange for me to think about things in these terms, because Sunderland almost exclusively lived at this level when I was a kid. We were always in that second tier, but it's only our 5th season at this level this century.
Right?
And it's such a it was bizarre when I was thinking about it, because like I said, when I grew up, and I don't want to say when that was, but many moons ago, we were kind of, always at that level. We was always kind of fighting to get out of that. But yeah, fifth season this century. It's such a strange league in terms of the mix of clubs you've got in there. I mean, you've got your big clubs dropping down from the Premier League aiming to bounce back, and they're mixing it with so many. We talked about those big clubs in League One, so the amount of smaller clubs that have come up to the championships kind of increasing, who are maybe punching above their weight, desperate to establish themselves in the second tier. But I mean, do you think that the championship's in danger of almost becoming a two-tier league in that sense?
I don't think so, but in a way, I do think it is a bit of it's kind of a three-tier league this season, because when I was doing my league table predictions, it was quite clear for me that you had a top 8, kind of a middle 8, and then a bottom 8. So Sunderland were kind of on the periphery of bottom 8 and middle 8, for anyone wondering.
Oh, I'll come on to that. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, it's the thing is, before the pandemic happened, the unpredictability of the championship was at an all-time high, because you had the teams coming down from the Premier League who were struggling to get back up. Then the pandemic happened, and that set a lot of clubs back financially. And that meant that since the pandemic, I think only Leeds, Brentford and Forest have been the only teams who have been promoted who didn't have parachute payments. So as soon as a team comes down from the Premier League, they're automatically in a promotion bid once again, unless there's a disaster like we saw with West Brom last season. And it's pretty much the same again this season. If you look at the vast majority of people's league table predictions before the season, it's basically the same top 6. You've got Norwich, Watford and Burnley, wasn't it?
Yes.
So you've got those 3 in everyone's top 6 pretty much, apart from anyone who's trying to be a bit out there, including me. But then the other teams who are up there are West Brom and Sheffield United, 2 other teams who still have parachute payments, considering they only got relegated a couple of seasons ago. The only other team who everyone has had in their top 6 is Middlesbrough, and that's because they've got Chris Wilder as a manager and have spent pretty massively themselves in the past few years. So the only way you can break that glass ceiling that you see in the Championship right now is being very, very well run, which is what we saw with Luton last season, breaking into the top 6. They've got one of the lowest wage budgets in the Championship, but because they've been so well run, they managed to break in there. And then Huddersfield as well signed brilliantly last summer. It's not been as great this season, but that was the reason why they broke in. Forest as well, they signed really well as well. So the only way you're getting in there now is if you are a very well-run club, which there are quite a few of in the Championship, or you just go out of your way to spend loads of money. But I think because of what we've seen with clubs like Derby, Wednesday and Reading, for example, who are all now feeling the after effects of going out of their way to gamble with their futures and get to the Premier League, clubs aren't really doing that anymore. So I can see why people may be worried that it's becoming a bit two-tier, but I think it's starting to get away from that, because clubs are now looking and thinking, if we sign well, we don't have to go out there and spend a shed load of money on players.
Yeah, and looking again at those bigger clubs that drop down, you've already mentioned that advantage that comes with the parachute payments. I mean, everyone can see the theory behind it, but then does it start stretching the point of it being a fair competition in the Championship?
100%. Initially, I was the same as a lot of people who were for parachute payments. I could see why they were there, but now I don't really see the point. You look at Fulham last season, for example, they managed to keep hold of Alexander Mitrovic, John Michel Seri, so many players who are on massive wages by Championship standards, and they don't need parachute payments anymore. The parachute payments are helping them to keep hold of the players that they should really not be keeping hold of anymore. So it gives teams coming down from the Premier League a massive unfair advantage, and I think the EFL, to be fair to them, are now seeing the light with that, and it seems like they are going towards the idea of getting rid of parachute payments. How it works out, I'm not sure. My suggestion would be making sure Championship clubs and Football League clubs have more of the money that's going around in the Premier League. Is that actually going to happen? I'm not too sure, because I think the Premier League will be fighting tooth and nail to keep all the money they can in the top flight. But I think we are at some point in the near future, going to see parachute payments get eradicated.
Yeah. In the Championship, it seems to be quite a lot of the big issues when it comes to the financial aspects of most clubs centred around the Championship. Seems to be that's where the biggest problems are in terms of teams trying to overstretch themselves and getting into trouble.
Exactly. And that's when you're a club like, I keep going back to him, but Derby, for example, the reason Derby nearly went out of business last year is because they overstretched themselves, because they thought, well, the way to get promoted in this division is by spending beyond your means. And that's what Reading and Wednesday have also done. And that's why they've tried scrupulous methods like selling your stadium back to yourself to try and get around financial fair play. So, yeah, that clubs don't seem to be doing that anymore. Middlesbrough are kind of the last club doing it, but I think they're more sensibly run. So they're not going to be, facing financial destruction by going down the route of trying to also try and spend alongside the clubs who are up there.
Yeah, and I was talking to a Coventry fan last week, so it obviously went well there, didn't it? But I mean, we'll get back to the kind of Championship predictions, because I want to hear more about that. You've already kind of mentioned a few, but I want to just get onto Sunderland a little bit and looking at the business we've got done in the summer. Dan Ballard, Adjilise at the back, Jack Clark signed from Spurs permanently, although we had him on loan. We sorted a contract out for Patrick Roberts from Manchester City. Recently got a deal to see Ellis Sims coming on loan from Everton. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about how Sunderland have gone about their business, in terms of preparing for the Championship? And what are your expectations about how we'll take up, stepping up to League One?
I think it's been very sensible. The Dan Ballard signing in particular is the one that's really caught my eye. And I think if I had to do some sort of a ranking of all the transfers that have happened this summer, I think Ballard would definitely be in my top 10, because I saw a lot of him with Millwall last season and he was a rock at the back for them, and such a young lad as well. To be playing that well is really, really impressive. And I thought he'd go on loan again to another Championship club this season, and I'm talking, probably a playoff chasing Championship side. But for him to go to a newly promoted club and for him to go there permanently, I think is a magnificent bit of business from Sunderland. So that could be not just a signing that is quite impressive now, but in the future. It wouldn't surprise me to see Dan Ballard playing Premier League football at some point in the future. So I think that's a really impressive signing. Adjilise, don't know too much about him, but I know he's had rave reviews from West Ham, and many West Ham fans were thinking he should be getting more of a chance in the first team, didn't they? So that one impressed me. Leon Dejaku, don't know too much about him, to be honest. Jack Clark's a funny one because I've never been too convinced with him. I know he scored at the weekend, but when he was at Leeds, for example, he didn't really pull up too many trees. So when Spurs brought him for 10 million quid, I was a bit surprised by that one. But he is only 21, so he could still end up being a really, really good player. And Ellis Sims, I think, is a really nice bit of business as well, because I remember seeing a bit of him in Blackpool when they were in League One, and I thought he was going to rejoin Blackpool last season, but that didn't happen for whatever reason. But I think him and Ross Stewart could make a really, really nice partnership up top, with Stewart being the one who scores the goals and Sims being a kind of foil for him, playing off him. So yeah, I think Sunderland's business has been really, really good. I
mean, looking at Championship managers, for me, I'm at that age, just seeing Championship manager brings back quite a lot of memories. But many hours in front of the old Amiga and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, Alex Neil's been there and done it in terms of taking Norwich City up to the Premier League, although obviously it wasn't from a position having just come up from League One. But do you see Alex Neil as possibly our biggest asset going into this season?
100%. Without a doubt, he's the biggest asset, because I think he's a really, really underrated manager at this level, because he got Norwich promoted before. Norwich were kind of in no man's land when he came in there, but then got them promoted. Sure, it didn't go too well in the Premier League, but show me a Norwich manager who has done well in the Premier League. But then when he was at Preston, he got Preston performing above their level. We were talking a minute ago about, clubs near the top of the Championship having to spend above their means to compete. Preston were on the edge of the playoffs despite having basically nothing spent on their squad. Their squad was made up of players like Ben Pearson and Daniel Johnson, for example, who cost, triple digits, at the lower end of triple digits. And Alex Neil was getting the best out of these players. So when Preston got rid of him, it maybe was about time they tried something new, and it's not gone brilliantly since then. They've just kind of coasted along in mid-table. But I've always thought Alex Neil deserves another crack at this level, and any manager who actually gets Sunderland promoted after all those years in the third tier was always going to take a massive job. And I think Alex Neil is one of those who, sure, he at times he can be a bit stubborn with the way he wants to play, and I'm sure at some point this season Sunderland fans may not be too impressed with him not wanting to change styles too much. But overall, he's a really good manager at this level, and he knows how to get the best out of the players at his disposal. And I think as long as he gets backing from Sunderland, and without a doubt think he will get backing over the next couple of years in the Championship, he'll reap the rewards, and Sunderland will be thinking to themselves, Christ, I'm glad we got this guy in.
Yeah, I think you have to go back to Mike Walker in terms of being successful at Norwich in the top tier with, beating Bayern Munich and all that sort of stuff. But do you think Sunderland are in an odd position? We've just spent 4 years in League One, but we might need to keep periodically reminding ourselves of that fact. If we start kind of creeping up the table, doing well, chasing promotion, that it not only kind of raises expectation, but the possible likelihood that the owners might kind of take that risk to make that final push.
Yeah, without a doubt, because I keep going back to what we were saying a second ago, but because of how the landscape of the Championship has changed because of COVID, promoted teams from League One haven't had that much success. I remember many years ago when Wolves, they got promoted twice on the bounce, didn't they? It's not really happened since then. In fact, since the pandemic, the highest a promoted club has finished is 16th, and that was Blackpool last season. So I think Sunderland fans have definitely got to keep that in mind. If they finished above 16th, that has got to be put down as a really good season for Sunderland. I know many fans will just want to get back to the Premier League as soon as possible, and I don't see that happening this season, but I think it's going to take a bit of time, and as long as they keep patience with Alex Neil and continue to build a side capable of competing near the upper end of the Championship, then it will work out. But I do get what you're saying, that it wouldn't surprise me if things they hit a bit of a flat bit of form at some point across the course of the season, and Sunderland fans start to get a bit tetchy, and that transfers over into the hierarchy, who think to themselves, maybe it's time for a change. But I hope that doesn't happen, because anything that resembles lower mid-table would be a really good season for Sunderland.
Yeah. And I mean, you've mentioned the new signings, but what players do you see in our squad that you can see doing well at this level, and maybe wouldn't mind having a derby last season when you're in the Championship?
Well, I mean, Ross Stewart is the obvious one, isn't he? Because he's just a phenomenal player. I mean, if you're talking about it from a derby perspective, then we desperately needed a striker last season. So having someone like Stewart would have been really handy. But I can easily see him getting double-digit goals this season, which Sunderland fans may not think is that much of a tally. But I think any promoted team who has a striker who gets that kind of amount of goals in a season would be regarded as a really good season. But Patrick Roberts is someone I'm keeping an eye on this season. He's someone who I've always been a fan of, despite him having a mixed career so far. He's had some loan spells where he stood out, others where he hasn't stood out as much. But I think he's clearly a talented player. So he's someone I'm looking forward to seeing more of in a Sunderland shirt this season. Elliot Embleton's someone I've always rated. And I think just overall, Sunderland have got themselves an experienced squad that's capable of staying up at this level, as well as having some young talent who are also capable of making the step up at this level. I'm also looking forward to seeing Luke O'Nien kicking 10 bells of S out of players, as he already did against Coventry at the weekend, and much to the bemusement of certain managers like Jose Mourinho. But yeah, I really like the Sunderland squad, and I think it's without a doubt going to stay up this season. I'll be very surprised if they're in a relegation battle.
Not a clash you usually expect, Jose Mourinho and Luke O'Nien, but
nope.
It did actually happen. But yeah, I mean, going back to the Championship in general, I mean, you've mentioned some of your season previews and predictions, but I mean, has it just been easy to say that, people think Watford are going to romp home with the Championship and the title this season? Because I mean, early signs in the summer, the people who they've got and they've hung on to suggest that they're the ones to beat?
I'm not sure if they are the ones to beat, to be honest. I think if they keep Emmanuel Dennis and Ismail Assar, they'll be the ones to beat. But that's a big if, because both have been strongly linked with a move away. We had Middlesbrough to win the league this season purely because of Chris Wilder being the manager. We are also kind of hedging our bets that they will sign a few more players before the window ends, but I think they probably will be. I don't think it's as predictable this season. Last season, if you went through everyone's league table predictions, I think everyone had the same top four in different orders of Fulham, West Brom, Bournemouth and Sheffield United, because of what we were mentioning before about the financial strength of those teams and the parachute payments. This season, it's been a bit different. I think a lot of people have had the same top six of Burnley, Norwich, Watford, Middlesbrough, Sheffield United and West Brom, with a couple of exceptions here or there. I've had Luton in my top six. But I think overall it is particularly unpredictable in the middle section. Like, there are quite a few teams you could pin down as dark horses this season. I've tipped Swansea to be a dark horse. Hull, they've got new owners now, so they're very ambitious and have already started signing some players who you wouldn't expect to see in a Hull shirt, like Jean-Michel Seri, for example. My co-host Justin's quite high on Bristol City this season. I don't personally see it, and I'm sure we'll go on to them in a sec. But there are so many teams who have the capability of challenging for the top six because they've got some very good players there who are just capable of making the step up, and some managers who are also very highly rated and are just, young guns who could be managing Premier League teams in the near future.
Yeah, and maybe at the other end of the table, I mean, who do you see maybe struggling at the other end? You've got your obvious ones, maybe, like the teams who have just come up, but do you see any surprise teams that maybe might drop in and have a battle to stay up?
There are certainly some surprise teams who could be down there. The obvious three that pretty much every league table prediction I've seen has had: Birmingham, Reading and Rotherham going down this season, mainly because Birmingham and Reading are both absolute nutcases of clubs, and Rotherham, they always struggle at championship level. Wigan, I think, will also be down there, but I fancy them to stay up because I quite rate Liam Richardson as a manager, and I think the squad's all right. There are some clubs who could be in trouble, though, like Huddersfield, for example. Despite being in the playoff final last season, they've lost their head coach. They've lost some key players from last season. Blackburn were ones who people thought may be in trouble, but early signs from their first game, I don't think that'll be too much of an issue personally. There were just a few clubs who I think could be in trouble, but overall I'd be surprised. I'm quite high on the bottom three that I mentioned a second ago, just because I think they're just in worse states than any other club is, to be honest. Just
looking at the opening day results in the Championship, I mean, did any stick out for you that might, suggest maybe kind of confirm those predictions? Because I'm thinking the likes of, you mentioned Reading, they went down at Blackpool. I mean, I had that on my coupon. Although I did expect Luton to take 3 points from Birmingham. But, I mean, I know it's opening day, but did any kind of results stand out for you based on what your feelings were before the season started?
I won't get too carried away with the opening day results because that's a mistake we've made in the past, because it is just the single game week. Luton should have won against Birmingham. They were the better team, and Nathan Jones will be definitely disappointed with that result, but I think it was just one of them where it just didn't go their way that day. Cardiff beating Norwich is the obvious one, isn't it? Because many people are expecting Norwich to win the league again. Norwich were very poor, though, so that's an early cause for concern for them. Having said that, Cardiff, despite getting the win, weren't great themselves. I think they only managed an expected goals of 0.08, and the goal they scored was, let's be honest, a bit of a fluke. So I don't think I'll get too carried away with that one just yet, despite it being a concerning performance from a Norwich perspective. Burnley were the one who really stood out for me on the opening day because they just played some miraculous football that we haven't seen ever by players in a Burnley shirt. So they were really, really good. And I was a bit unsure about them finishing in the top six this season, but I think that performance gave me more confidence that they will. It's a long season. I remember West Brom starting very well last season, but they ended up finishing 10th after just completely falling apart in the second half of the season. But overall, not really too much from the opening day, apart from Burnley being probably a bit better than I was expecting.
Yeah. And as we said, I mean, we're playing Bristol City this weekend, who themselves only dropped out of the Championship for 2 years since 2008. So pretty established Championship side. But they have kind of struggled under Nigel Pearson the last couple of years, and maybe even beyond that, it was kind of lower end of the table. So I know you mentioned kind of Justin thinks they're going to improve on that. But I mean, what's your general feelings about Bristol City, where they are this season?
Bristol City fans are going to be fuming that you've got me on the podcast to talk about them, because I haven't really rated Bristol City's chances this season. That's purely because they had a very mixed season last season. They scored the sixth most goals, I think it was, off the top of my head, or was it the seventh most goals? Seventh most goals last season, but they had the third worst defensive record. So they were great entertainment, but they dropped so many points last season from winning positions that it was getting a bit ridiculous. Now, they have strengthened this summer. Cal Naismith is coming on, who for me was the best defender in the division last season with Luton. It was a bit of a surprise to see him go to Bristol City, but I think that's a good move. They've also brought in Kane Wilson, who's a very highly rated wing back from Forest Green. So they both look like good moves. Is it going to transform their defensive problems? I think it'll improve them, but I don't think it'll transform them. One of the reasons why they were so high scoring last season was because they had Andy Vyman, who was in the form of his life. He scored 22 goals and had by far the best goal conversion rate in the division, I think, for any player who scored more than double digits. But I don't see him having that good a season again, because before that season, he had only managed double digits once in his career. So I'll be surprised if he does that again, but they have got some very good players. Alex Scott in midfield is a phenomenal talent. He's only 19 years old. He's someone to keep an eye on. He was being linked with Manchester United, but I'm not sure how much truth there is to those rumours, but he's a really, really good player. Antoine Semenyo, I think, is out with an injury, but he's a really, really good player. They have got some very, very good players. It's just Nigel Pearson as a manager, who I'm not really too confident of. I've always thought his career is a bit overrated compared to how much people actually think he is an accomplished manager at this level. And I don't think Bristol City fans are completely convinced with him. I've seen some say they are, but they were booing him a lot and the team last season after games. So it wouldn't surprise me if he did get sacked at some point this season. But I struggle to see them being anything more than mid-table, to be completely honest.
Yeah, well, you mentioned actually that they lost Leeds last season, and obviously they did that against Hull on Saturday, where they took the lead and then they lost in the 94th minute, I think it was, but they were in front at Hull. But is there a chance, if he hasn't fixed that, Nigel Pearson could find himself under pressure quite early on this season?
Yeah, 100%. If Bristol City aren't, well, if after the first couple of months they haven't secured, I don't know, 5 or so wins, then that 100% he'll be under pressure, because, as I say, fans aren't completely convinced by him anyway, as far as I'm concerned. I will be honest, the whole game was very unlucky. They had a penalty given against them, which wasn't a penalty in a million years by my standing. And the goal they conceded in the 94th minute took a massive deflection into the top corner. And I don't think I could be too critical of that performance, but if they don't get off to a good start and they are struggling after the first couple of months, then yeah, Nigel Pearson will be certainly one of the managers at the front of the queue to be under pressure. I think even at the start of the season, there are probably 3 or 4 managers who are under more pressure than him, but he'll be certainly one of those under pressure, especially after they were quite active in the transfer window this summer.
Yeah, and if Alex Neil's done his homework on Bristol City, which I'm sure he has, I mean, what will he be expecting from Nigel Pearson's side?
He'll be expecting them to play direct. Andy Vyman, as I say, is their main threat, one of the hardest workers in the division, and was one of the most clinical finishers in the division last season. But I think if you get a leash on him, then you stop a lot of Bristol City's attacks. They like to operate down the wings, particularly with the wing-backs. They've got Jay Da Silva is another one who has had a kind of a mixed time there with injury, but is still a talented player on his day. So Alex Neil, they'll have to keep it tight with Andy Vyman and try to restrict the the attacks down the wings. But overall, I think Sunderland will be heading into this thinking this is one where we should be looking to get 3 points. Will they actually get it? Not too sure, because Bristol City were very hit and miss at home last season. They had a period where they didn't win a game for ages at home before they eventually managed to mend it and started being awful away from home instead. So, yeah, Bristol City are a hard team to nail down, but I think Sunderland can fancy their chances of getting 3 points from this game.
You mentioned Semenyo, who is injured at the moment. I'm not sure how big that injury is, but he struggled to make an impact when he was on loan to us 2 years ago, I think it was. But now Bristol City rejecting bids of around 10 million for him, which, it's something that seems to happen quite often to Sunderland for some reason. But would you be surprised if he made a move away before the window closes?
No, not at all. I think his injury may put people off, because you don't really see players move too much when they're injured. But he's a marvellous player. Last season he was fantastic. It's not just he improved on his goal scoring last season, but his link-up play has always been brilliant. He's a fantastic dribbler and setting up chances. I can't remember how many assists he got last season, but I think it was double figures. So you've got yourself a player who's really, really talented and has always been quite highly rated anyway, but now he's actually showing it in his performances as well. And that's always a mix that I think a lot of clubs look for, someone who's highly rated behind the scenes, but is also doing it on the pitch too. And he's still so young, so I think it wouldn't surprise me if he did move away from Ashton Gate this summer. And I think Bristol City fans wouldn't be too surprised to see him leave either.
Yeah. And we talked before about what to expect from Bristol City, but just in general, when it comes to the Championship, and I think it surprised a few people in our first game against Coventry, because they came to the Stadium of Light and kept the ball well at times, although they didn't do a great deal with it. But I think they came out with over 60% possession at the Stadium of Light. And going back to League One, the difference in opposition from week to week there in League One was huge, where, they differed so much from one side just parking the bus and humping it along. Should we expect to see more sides playing, that sort of possession-based football against us this season, and maybe come out of games, we should expect to maybe come out of quite a lot of games having had less than the ball in the opposition?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think, no disrespect to the teams in League One, but I think half the teams in League One will have a manager who likes to play long ball, because they know that their squad isn't as strong as the teams at the upper end of the table. So they've got to basically be rough and ready and try to unnerve teams. Whereas in the Championship now, you go through the managers who are here, there's just slightly more than a handful, I think, of managers who like to play long ball. And even then, quite often, they're more than happy to have the ball around and play with possession. Because I think the Championship, in terms of the actual talent here, is only getting stronger and stronger. And you're seeing more managers think, right, we've got defenders now who can keep the ball and make the right decision when it comes to playing that pass. So, you look at the likes of Millwall, for example. They've got Gary Rowett. They're always going to play longish ball. And then others like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, I think Alex Neil he's not long ball, but he's more direct, isn't he, than most managers. So I think he's one of only a few managers really who will play a more direct style than other teams in the Championship, because I think most of them now are thinking to themselves, our players are talented enough to keep the ball, so we may as well make the most of it when we have got the ball.
Yeah. And we'll have a big following down at Ashton Gate, quite often, this time of the season when it's still warm, everyone likes a good trip away, but we do like to travel in decent numbers anyway. But do you think a lot of fans in the Championship are going to be happy to see us kind of back in the Championship to maybe create some of those decent atmospheres this season, or do you think most fans just see that aspect as a bit of a pain in the arse?
I think every fan likes having a good atmosphere at games. Sure, it may not be nice to see your home support getting outsung by the away fans, but I think many people will be expecting that with Sunderland this season, just because they are such a massive club. I think Bristol City away, is that the longest trip? Sunderland fans are going to have to make this season? I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but it must be. It must be up there. I know there's quite a few northern clubs in the league this season, but either way, I think having a club like Sunderland with its massive fan base is a credit to the division. I watched the game against Coventry at the weekend, and just the atmosphere in that alone was fantastic. And having 40,000 plus at a championship game is fantastic. So I think plenty of people will be looking forward to making the trip to the Stadium of Light this season, even though it is quite far away for most fans. But at the same time, I think many will be looking forward to having Sunderland at their own grounds, just because it's going to be a lively atmosphere.
And just to finish off, because it's very rare that I'm able to get a neutral, person to discuss the fixture. So I don't normally ask for a prediction because it's pretty much worthless. But who does your gut tell you will get a result at Ashton Gate this weekend?
I was very impressed with Sunderland in the first game. It's typical Coventry for them to go out and, grab something at the last minute, because they did that on so many occasions last season. I would say, I think a draw would be a fair result, to be honest. As much as I don't fancy Bristol City to pull up many trees this season, they have got a good squad, and I think they'll be extra keen to get something on the board after throwing it away against Hull at the weekend, and I think Sunderland will take a point as well. I think they're going to finish around similar positions in the table this season, so I'd go for a 1-1 draw in this game, just to be nice and boring.
Yeah, there's splinters in your backside there, just trying to keep everyone happy there, Ryan. I thought, being on a Sunderland podcast, he's going to go for it and say we'll get 3 points. But
I didn't want to say Sunderland, because otherwise it'd be like I'm pandering to the crowd, wouldn't it? But usually we try to be as honest as possible on the second tier, and I'm sure at some point across the course of the season we may rub Sunderland fans up the wrong way. But honestly, it's just us speaking our minds, because we don't see the point in just saying, "Oh, they played well." So I don't usually sit on the fence this much, ladies and gentlemen. I can assure you of that.
Well, I'm biased, but I'm going for a 1-1 draw as well. So, to be honest, I'll probably take that. But just on that note, Ryan, thank you very much for joining us, because it is hot as well. I don't know about you, but I'm roasting in this heat. And but yeah, thank you for taking the time out for us, and it's been a pleasure.
I've been the utter professional that I am. I always shut the windows when I'm recording, and after about half an hour of recording, I start to immediately regret that decision. But thank you for letting me come on the pod this week. I'm sure it won't be the last time we speak over the course of the season, but I look forward to having a chat about all things Black Cats.
That's it, and I look forward to catching up periodically to see how the Championship's panning out, and to see, for you to tell us all your predictions were coming true.
All the incorrect predictions.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Ryan. Really appreciate it. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. Keep a look at ROKER Report for all the build-up ahead of the game at Bristol City on Saturday even. Getting used to playing on Sunday already. We've only had one game. Also, shout out to sign up to the ROKER Report newsletter on the website. If you just sign up to that, it's going to keep you nicely up to date on what's posted on a daily basis. But from us, it's bye for now.